All right, so we're going to start from something that you don't have in front of you. This is a passage from the Haggadah, which is on the face of it, a really baffling passage, and there's all sorts of problems and contradictions, internal contradictions in it. And I've noticed in a lot of creative Haggadahs, they just omit it because they don't know how to deal with the difficulties. But it doesn't take very long and too much study to realize what's going on in the passage. I'm going to start with that, and then we'll go through a Talmudic passage which expands on it greatly and takes us into all sorts of interesting and adventurous directions. So page, I'm going to just read from the Haggadah. This is, you can look at the Mishnah now if you want, and you'll see there's some similarities. But this is what it says in the Haggadah. Maseh Rabbi Eliezer, Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, Harei ani kiven shivim shana. So this literally means I am like someone who is 70 years old. Velo zakiti shetei amer yitziat Mitzrayim beleilot. And I never figured out how it is that we're supposed to tell the story of leaving Egypt at night. Until Ben Zoma explained it to me, Shenemar, as it says. So Ben Zoma is quoting the Bible. Laman tiskor et yom tzedcha me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yimei chayecha. In order that you will remember leaving Egypt all the days of your life. Yimei chayecha hayamim. If it had just said days of your life, that would just be the days. So you just tell the story of Egypt during the day. Kol yimei chayecha, it's just that one added word, kol, halelot. That indicates that you also tell it at night. V'chachamim omrim, but the sages have a different opinion. Yimei chayecha olam hazeh, the days of your life means that you should tell the story in this world, which presumably would mean day and night. Kol yimei chayecha lavi limot hamashiach. All the word kol, which means all, would incorporate the days of the Messiah, which means that you would tell the story of Pesach even when the Messiah comes, after the Messiah comes. Okay, so two baffling questions. One is kind of a technical question, although it's still odd, and the other is really baffling. So I'll start with the technical question. What does he mean when he says, Harei ani kiven shivim shana? I am like someone who is 70. What does it mean to be like someone who is 70? Why doesn't he just say, I'm 70? So that's one question. You may have read ahead, so don't give it away. That's a question right now. The second question is, why on earth would he assume that you wouldn't tell the story of Exodus at night? I mean, remember, we're reading this passage at the Seder. Right. The Seder's at night. I mean, what possible logical reason would there be that you wouldn't tell the story at night? I mean, nighttime actually is a storytelling time. People tell stories all the time. Why would there be any kind of prohibition? Why would you have to be a smart guy at 70 years old before you figured out that you're allowed to tell the story of Exodus at night? Where at all in the tradition is there a hint of a prohibition of telling the story of Exodus at night? So it's just a bizarre question. All right. So it turns out, some of you were here, I think Saturday morning, where I said you have to look up everything in the Haggadah to understand the greater context. So, in fact, the answer to both questions is in the Talmud. The thing is that the long Talmud discussion's not in the Haggadah. We're going to now read the long Talmud discussion based on this passage and get some answers. At the same time, like the Talmud often does, this will unfold and expand the whole notion of Pesach and freedom in the Exodus story and give us a whole way of thinking about what it means to be a free people and what it means to exercise power as a free people. So you'll see that in the passage, which is mostly a story. So most of this is a story. So we'll start with the Mishnah. So the Mishnah you have now in front of you. And I'm going to read. And some of this from the Mishnah is taken exactly from, well, I should say it's the opposite. You have the Mishnah and the editors of the Haggadah take it. But some of the Hebrew is exactly the same. The translator, though, is different. I translated the passage from the Haggadah. I didn't translate this Mishnah. So what we're going to have in front of us is very similar in the Hebrew, but you'll see it's a bit different in the English. So the Exodus from Egypt is to be mentioned now when you have brackets there. It's the translator that's adding it. So when it says the Exodus from Egypt is to be mentioned in the Shema, that's not what it says. Now, the translator there is correct. This is the discussion. if we had known that in the Haggadah, it would make things a lot easier. Okay, 'cause I'll tell you, I might need somebody to grab a prayer book for me in a second, but at nighttime, all right. I guess, Mo, do you know where the Shema is in there?
Yeah.
Do I have to tell you the page number, or do you know it? But you know it, right? Yeah, I thought you did. Okay. There is a paragraph in the Shema that mentions Yetziat Mitzrayim, leaving Egypt. Anybody know which paragraph that is? Because there's 3 paragraphs to the Shema. There's the Shema and the V'ahavta. There's a whole bit about if you sin, it won't rain. And there's a 3rd paragraph about the tzitzit. So which of those paragraphs mentions the exodus from Egypt? Anybody know off the top of their head? I mean, we say it every day, but we don't pay attention. I mean, including me. I'm not blaming anybody. These things become rote. Okay, so it's the last paragraph, which is the paragraph of tzitzit. So, Mo, if you don't mind, could you just read that paragraph out loud? No, read it in English. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
And God said to Moses, instruct the people that in every generation they should put tzitzis on the corner of their garments and bind a thread of blue to the tzitzis, the fringe on each corner. Look upon these tzitzis, and you will be reminded of all the mitzvot of Hashem, and will fulfill them, and not be seduced by your heart, nor led astray by your eyes. Then you will remember and observe all my mitzvot, and be holy before your God. I am God, your Hashem, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.
Who brought you out of the land of Egypt. There we go. That's the paragraph that mentions leaving Egypt. We call that paragraph the paragraph about leaving Egypt. Now, when we read it, we think it's the tzitzit paragraph. I call it the tzitzit paragraph. So the Rabbi, this in the Mishnah, they don't call it that. They call it the paragraph about leaving Egypt. Okay. Now, so what Rabbi Elazar is wondering is, do we say this paragraph at night? Do we recite, when we recite the Shema at night, do we say this paragraph? Okay. Now, it sounds like a silly question. Why wouldn't we say it? But actually, there's a very good reason to think we might not. What's that?
You don't, you're not supposed to wear.
You don't wear tzitzit at night, right? A tallis is something you only wear during the day. So he's perfectly right. Why? I mean, it's a perfectly logical question. Why should I say this paragraph at night when it refers to a mitzvah that I'm not supposed to do at night? So and yet we do it. So Rabbi Elazar is saying, I never figured that out. I never knew why we do that. Okay, so suddenly, remember that.
Makes sense.
Right, that's right. So what we learn from this is when Elazar was talking about, we thought he was talking about the Seder.
Right.
During the Seder, am I allowed to tell the story of the Exodus at night? It turns out that's not the context. The context is a discussion of the Shema, specifically the 3rd paragraph of the Shema, which is about the tzitzit. And now he has a very reasonable question. The reasonable question is, do we say this paragraph at night? Because we don't wear tzitzit at night. Okay, now I'm going to keep going. Behold, I am like one. So we still have that mystery. What does that mean? But we solved the first mystery, is that's the reason why you might not say it at night, because you don't wear the tzitzit at night. Who is 70 years, I have never been worthy to find a reason why the exodus from Egypt should be mentioned at nighttime until Ben Zoma expounded it, for it says, and I'm not going to go on. The rest of this is exactly like it is in our Haggadah. So Ben Zoma finally convinced me you do say it at night. Now, there's a few things that are interesting here, but it's not my main point, so then we'll move on. But one thing that's interesting is that you don't have to be a profound poet to kind of get something deeper that's going on here, which is that you do tell stories of hope even during the darkness. So even during dark times, you should tell stories of hope. So that's partly what's going on. And even during redemptive messianic times, when everything's great and you don't feel like you have to worry about anything, you should also tell the story. So in a deeper sense, it's saying, tell stories of redemption when you're in your worst times, because it'll give you hope. Also tell stories of darkness even in your best times, because it'll remain a caution to you. Don't get too comfortable, even during Messianic times. All right. But now what we're left with is, why does he refer to himself as, I am someone who is like 70 years, as opposed to, I'm just 70, or I'm 63, or whatever it is. Okay. So now we have a very long story that explains that, and that's the bulk of the Talmud now on this topic. Okay. It is related that a certain disciple came before Rabbi Joshua and asked him, is the evening tefillah compulsory or optional? Evening tefillah is Mariv. Do I have to do it or not? He came before Rabbi Joshua. Joshua was an important rabbi, but he was not the important rabbi. They had a hierarchy in those days. Right. The president of the assembly, this was in Israel, was Rabban Gamliel. And Rabbi Joshua was not. He was a respected rabbi. But somebody asked him, you're allowed to ask. So he asked his opinion. Is it compulsory or is it optional? It's an odd question for us because we think of these prayers as always being compulsory. So why would you ask? But in those days, they were still figuring it out. And Joshua says optional. You actually don't have to say it. If you feel like it, you can, but you don't have to say it. Okay? He then presented himself before Rabbi Gamliel and asked, is the evening tefillah compulsory or optional? So this is a guy that every rabbi in America and most doctors understand. He's shopping for an answer. He didn't like that answer, so he's going to ask somebody else for the answer. So this is what happens when you have diffuse authority. When you're not really sure who's in charge, what happens is the people try to find the person that's going to give them the answer that they want. So it happens all the time. It happens to Orthodox rabbis, conservative rabbis. It happens to lots of doctors. It happens to accountants. It happens to lawyers, to judges. You want to find you want the person that's going to give you your answer. That's what this kind of troublemaking student does. What we find out later is that his agenda is even deeper than that. And this whole passage is going to be about how you exercise authority as a free people. Anyway, he creates his argument because he asked Rabbi Gamliel, and Rabbi Gamliel says it's compulsory. Exactly the opposite of Rabbi Joshua says. Now, he's a troublemaker, and then he says, but wait. But he said, did not Rabbi Joshua tell me it's optional? So he's creating a feud between Rabbi Gamliel, who's in charge, and Rabbi Joshua, who's not, and saying to Rabbi Gamliel, your pupil, or the person who's not in charge, told me exactly the opposite. Okay, so that gets Rabbi Gamliel upset. He said, wait till the champions. That's how they referred to as the rabbis in those days. So those were the days, the good old days. The rabbis were called champions. So wait till the champions entered the Beit HaMidrash. When the champions came in, someone, it's probably the student, rose and inquired, is the evening tefillah compulsory or optional? Rabban Gamliel replied, it is compulsory. And he's kind of looking out and he's daring. Is anybody going to contradict me? Because I'm the one in charge here. Said Rabban Gamliel to the sages, is there anyone who disputes this? And he's probably looking at Rabbi Joshua. So Rabbi Joshua replied to him, no. Well, wait, Rabbi Joshua had just told the student the opposite, but now he's not actually going to stand up to the authority of Rabban Gamliel. No, he said to him, Rabbi Gamliel, did they not report you to me as saying that it is optional? So I heard that you said the opposite. He then went on. Joshua, stand up and let them testify against you. So now he's really getting to Joshua. So stand up. Rabbi Joshua stood up and said, were I alive and he, the witness, dead, the living who could contradict the dead. So if this guy who was a witness were dead, I would lie. Because he'd be dead and no one would be able to contradict me. But now that he is alive and I'm alive, how can the living contradict the living? So he's in a spot right now. But you'll also notice that Rabban Gamliel is publicly humiliating Joshua. Right? He's making him stand up. And didn't you say? Because all this had happened in private. But now Rabban Gamliel is making it a crisis of authority. And his response to it is to publicly humiliate Joshua and make him confess that he ruled against Rabban Gamliel, he shouldn't have done it, and he would have lied. Anyway, Rabban Gamliel remained sitting. That's how it was in those days too. The authority would be sitting and not standing because it was the position of respect to be sitting. Head must not be higher than king. From The Sound of Music. Never mind. Not Sound of Music. What is that? The King and I. The King and I. Yeah, never mind. And Rabbi Joshua remained standing until all the people began to shout and said to Chutzpit the interpreter. Chutzpit the interpreter, it doesn't mean interpreter. It means human microphone. A Maturgamon in those days, they didn't have microphones. So they would this would be a job I would get in those days. If you have a loud voice, you would get hired to be the human microphone. So it didn't matter if Rabban Gamliel had a soft voice, a chutz, because he's talking to a loud crew. Apparently, the ancient Greeks had this too. Is that you had Homer, who had a soft voice, and then you had professional actors who would boom out his voice in these amphitheaters. Anyway, so they told Chutzpit stop, and he stopped. They then said, how long is Rabban Gamliel going on insulting Rabbi Joshua? This is humiliating to him. He's making him stand up. Everybody else gets to sit. On New Year's last, he insulted him. This had happened before when Joshua challenged his authority, and he humiliated, and maybe at some point we'll read that story. And in matters of the firstborn and the affairs of Rabbi Tzadok, so he had done it before to Rabbi Tzadok, they're getting sick of Rabban Gamliel, who's being dictatorial in his use of power, and also publicly humiliating people. Now he insults him again, says Rabbi Joshua, come, let us depose him. So this is what they're going to do. They're going to get rid of him as the one who was in charge. It's called the president. Okay. So he gets impeached. Yeah, he gets impeached. They depose him. It doesn't talk about the mechanism. It goes right away to, whom shall we appoint instead? We can hardly appoint Rabbi Joshua because he's one of the parties involved. So that's an interesting. Remember, they're struggling now with use of authority, how to use authority, how to have transitions in government, who comes next. So it can't be Rabbi Joshua, because then it would really look like a coup. Yeah. Like Rabbi Joshua is responding to his humiliation by seizing power. So they say it can't be that. We can hardly appoint Rabbi Akiva, because perhaps Rabbi Gamliel will bring a curse on him because he has no ancestral merit. So some of you may remember Akiva comes out of nowhere to be a famous rabbi. Yeah. His parents aren't famous people. He was an ignorant person. And they're afraid that this lack of ancestral merit, in Hebrew it's schut, schus, right. You've heard, some of you heard that. Schus is, your parents, your great-grandparents, your great-great-parents were rabbis, were aristocrats. So therefore, in this, you'll be invulnerable to curses. But there's also some sense like dynasties are important in those days. And in exercising power, and also having symbols of power, dynasties are important. And Akiva, has got this modest background. People won't respect him.
Was now we anything other than just a rabbi in the family? You said aristocrat. What kind of aristocrat?
Would be a rabbi in the family. So it'd be a learned person in the family for them, a rabbinic aristocrat. Now we can make fun of this, but who are the main candidates for presidency in the United States the next 2 years? Somebody named Bush? Have we heard that name before? Somebody named Clinton? Yeah. So dynasties, and I don't know if you've ever heard the name Kennedy. I mean, dynasties are important in politics. They are important in politics, and so it's not a new thing. It's not just an old thing. It's something that's Akiva's not part of a dynasty. People won't respect him, even though they're implying, of course, is that Akiva is the most qualified, but it can't be him. Yeah.
You have lines of priests.
Yeah, right, you do, right.
So, but as the rabbinate began, I'm kind of surprised that there were lines of rabbis.
There were.
I mean, I could see disciples being lines, but not inherited.
It's human nature, it's not just, you could try to have a revolution. I mean, America also is supposed to be this egalitarian country, that where it doesn't matter, it's the strength of what you do, and yet this happens all the time. There are dynasties, there's dynastic families, it's part of human nature to see that. And so, but this whole story is a meditation on political power, and really how you construct ideal political institutions in a free society. So you're going to see, that's part of their struggle. They would prefer that it not be dynastic, but they're thinking of the people and trying to think, who's going to engender respect? Let me keep going. Let us then appoint Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who is wise and rich. Okay, rich also is important to them. You'll see why rich is important.
Very tribal.
Well, you'll see why in a second. But rich is not unimportant. Just like nowadays, let's not be naive. I mean, in American government, without wealth,
you can't even run.
Right, exactly, and we're, of course, the most developed democracy that ever lived, and so we've got these issues too. Okay, let me keep going. And in descendant, 10th in descendant from Ezra, who in their mind is the first rabbi, really, and so that's pretty good schus. Okay. He is wise, so if anyone puts a question to him, he will answer it. Now, they put that first. Yeah. His ability is first, but he is rich, so that if occasion arises for paying court to Caesar, Caesar was the imperial power, he's going to need the money. He will be able to do so to get to Rome. And there's also the implication that he's incorruptible. If he's wealthy, then you won't be able to bribe him, right? Which, interesting, we've had American politicians that have implied that. I mean, remember when Ross Perot ran? That's one of the things he said. Look, no one's going to bribe me. I don't care about campaign contributions. I'm a billionaire, and that was the reason why we were supposed to vote for him.
Louisiana is very
right. That's right.
I lived 6 years of my life in Louisiana.
Yeah.
So they figure if somebody's in the government, you can vote for them again because they've already had their chance to fill up. Yeah. As if that really is true, but
Yeah. He is 10th in descent from Ezra, so that he has ancestral merit, and he cannot bring a curse on him. So the curse stuff you could take or leave. You can laugh at it. You can not laugh at it. But this idea of ancestral merit being part of a dynasty was important to them, as it is important to us. Okay. So all this about this is all about transitions. Figuring out how you have efficient political systems, how you remove people, okay? But now it gets even deeper. They went and said to him, will your honor consent to become the head of the academy? He replied, I will go and consult the members of my family. There's a bit of an error in translation. So the word members of my family here almost always in the Talmud means my wife. And you'll see it's his wife that he goes to consult, okay? And that's a very important lesson. You don't make any changes in life without consulting your spouse. That's the first thing he does. Actually, this becomes halakha. So you don't make major changes in your life without consulting your spouse. He went and consulted his wife. Now she's got her issues. She said to him, perhaps they will depose you later on. And is this a stable political system? Right. They just were angry at Gamliel and they deposed him. Maybe that's going to happen to you. Very interesting reply. He replied to her, let a man use a cup of honor for one day, even if it be broken the next. Because you don't worry about those things. Also implied in this is the responsibility. You can't avoid politics just because it's messy. A very important statement there. Because politics is inherently messy, and it's got it brings with it all these feuds, all the potential for corruption, and yet it's the way we get things done. So you can't avoid politics and power just because it's messy. I actually could get broken. I mean, in the cup of honor, is him. That could get broken, but you can't avoid it. She said to him, you have no white hair. We're getting to the second major issue here. And what does she mean by that? They won't respect you. You're not old enough. That's her way of saying you're not old enough. He was 18 years old that day, so he was 18. That's interesting. That never occurred to them. Hey, should we ask this 18-year-old guy?
How long had they been married?
People got married when they were 14 in those days. And a miracle was wrought for him, and 18 rows of hair on his beard turned white. That is why Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, behold, I am like someone who was 70 years old. So in fact, what we learned is he was 18. This is like the punchline of this Shaggy Dog story, is that he was actually 18. He said he's like someone 70, meaning that he looked like he was someone who was 70. That's the case for me too, by the way. I'm only 18. We knew that. Well, I knew that you wouldn't respect me otherwise. So I prayed about 50 years ago. I actually was gray very early in life, but now I can't claim that anymore.
Is he also saying that it's not so much just the white hair, but the fact that he's got the wisdom from the 70-year-old?
So it is saying that, yeah. I'm like someone who's 70 years in wisdom, but now also in appearance, and that way they'll right. I'm going to keep going so we can get it done. Atana taught, okay, on that day. So that day is the day that Rabbi Elazar became president and Gamliel was deposed. Remember, a meditation here on political systems and the use of power in a free state, okay? Because that was also part of what's going on here. Is dissent allowed? Right? Rabbi Joshua dissents from the ruling, and he expresses that.
But why does he not admit to it?
Who?
Rabbi Joshua.
Because Rabbi Gamliel is dictatorial, and he's afraid he's going to be, he'll be expelled. He's afraid. Rabbi Gamliel has a temper. There's all sorts of reasons why. Okay. So on that day, the doorkeeper was removed, and permission was given to the disciples to enter. For Rabbi Gamliel issued a proclamation saying, no disciple whose character does not correspond to exterior may enter the Beit HaMidrash. So Rabbi Gamliel had this rule, which was elitist, of keeping people away from the levers of power. The people themselves, and it's a free society, but the people don't get it. They don't understand, and we got to keep them away. And I'm only allowing those people that actually have the proper moral character, of course, in addition to the wisdom of Torah, to be in the room when we make decisions. On the day they deposed them, they opened the doors, and anybody that could come in. So now these are still debates that people have about politics, and you see it in Plato, you see it now too. How elitist should it be? Who gets to make these decisions? How wide should we open the door? Synagogues, Jewish communities have this debate. All right. No, on that day, many seats were added. Rabbi Yochanan said there is a different opinion on this matter between Abba Joseph ben Dostai and the rabbis. One authority says that 400 seats were added, the other 700. So suddenly there were masses of people that were making these decisions. That's a lot of people for those days. Rabban Gamliel became alarmed and thought and said, perhaps, God forbid, I withheld Torah from Israel. This is the first statement we have where Rabban Gamliel expresses some remorse here. So maybe I arranged it differently. I was trying to figure out the best way of ruling this unruly people. And maybe I made a mistake. I mean, maybe it didn't allow for the better rulings, for the free and unfettered debate. Let's keep going. A Tana taught, Eidiot was formulated on that day. That's a whole section of the Talmud, was written that day, in one day. And whenever the expression on that day is used, which is all through the Talmud, it referred to that day. And there was no halacha about which any doubt existed in the Beit Midrash, which was not fully elucidated. So all the doubts, remember those tekus that we talked about before? I mean, all the ties in the Talmud, all the mysteries were unraveled that day, all because they let more people in, and Rabban Gamliel had not let them in, and he was responsible then for all these puzzles and mysteries which could easily have been unraveled. We're going to skip the next paragraph, because you're going to see more about how Rabban Gamliel, it's technical and complicated, and mostly it's about how Rabban Gamliel feels remorse about the way he had led up to that point. Rabban Gamliel's remorse is important in the story, so I'm skipping ahead. Rabban Gamliel, skipping a paragraph, thereupon said, "This being the case, I will go and apologize to Rabbi Joshua." It's a very important turning point. Rabban Gamliel decides to apologize. I did it all wrong. Now think about political figures today, and the difficulty in admitting error, in apologizing to people that they humiliated. So I think we are rightly meant to feel very sympathetic for Rabban Gamliel here, who allows events to influence his heart, and really figures I might have done something wrong. So he goes to apologize. We'll go and apologize to Rabbi Joshua. When he reached his house, he saw that the walls were black. He said to him, "From the walls of your house, it is apparent that you are a charcoal burner, a blacksmith." He replied, this is Josh, "Alas for the generation of which you are the leader, seeing that you know nothing of the troubles of the scholars, their struggles to support and sustain themselves." So he rebukes him yet again. So you don't even know me. Yeah. Well, no. Remember, it's Gamliel. Gamliel's trying to apologize, and he goes to his house. So we learned something important there. He's never been to his house. These people are colleagues, have been colleagues for 20, 30 years. He's never been for his house, and he doesn't realize that Rabbi Joshua is poor. He goes to his house, and he's got a little blacksmith operation in his one-room house, and Rabbi Gamliel is looking at the wall and says, "I had no idea. I had no idea that you were so poor." Now Rabbi Joshua allows his anger to come and says, "You don't know me. I mean, you don't know, and you don't know anybody. You're sitting in the Beit Midrash. You don't know your people.
You're above it all."
Yeah, right. So and this is of course the criticism of Rabban Gamliel's. You're an elitist. You're stuck in your Beit Midrash. You don't go out and visit the people, and you're keeping people from you. Okay. And you'll see Rabban Gamliel accepts this critique. He said to him, "I apologize. Forgive me." So see, Rabban Gamliel is I believe apologizing for everything. He paid no attention to him. So Rabbi Joshua, now you may remember from other studies that you have to apologize 3 times. So Rabbi Joshua decides the first time, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to say anything. He says, "Do it out of respect for my father." So not for me. This whole business about my father. His father was very important. Okay, so for my father, his father was Yehuda Hanasi, who was the editor of the Mishnah. So he's a very important guy. He then became reconciled, so he accepts him. So it's interesting. Rabbi Joshua doesn't make him apologize 3 times. He just makes him apologize twice, and then he reconciles with him. Now, when he reconciles with him, the two of them decide Rabban Gamliel should go back and be the president. So there should be another transition. Because Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, after all, is only 18. You can also, in your own heads, I'm not sure why, kind of discuss why does Rabban Gamliel need another chance. The Talmud and these 2 rabbis decide he does. Okay. They said, "Who will go and tell the rabbis?" I'm going to skip the rest. I'm going to skip this paragraph because it's a long and complicated passage about how do you tell the rabbis that we've decided to make the change, or that they should make the change. What's important in that paragraph is that they're very sensitive to Elazar's feelings. Remember, now Elazar now is the president. He's the president. And so what you have here is a real sensitivity, again, to transitions in power in a free country. Remember that in dictatorships and tyrannies, transitions are almost always violent. There's revolutions, or somebody kills but in a free country, really one of the benefits of many, of course, of being in a free country is that transitions are peaceful. So you have them struggling with that. Okay, so how do we make... You saw it before. They just deposed Rabban Gamliel. Now, it was peaceful, but it created bad feeling. So now their plan is to depose Azariah again. Okay, I also want to say before we turn, the scene where the two of them meet in that guy's house is very powerful because it also shows in developing systems of power in a free country, the various factions have to be aware of each other and have to be aware of how they live. If we together in a democracy are not fully aware of how the different factions, because democracies are made up of different factions, different tribes, like I talked about on Shabbat, if we're not inhabiting the locations of each other, then we're never going to understand the difficulties that we face, the challenges we face. That's the first thing Joshua tells him. You don't know me. You don't understand my poverty. And Rabban Gamliel accepts that critique. All right, so let's turn the page and we'll finish the story. They said to him, how shall we do it? Okay, so this is when they decide to make the change. Well, Rabban Gamliel will go back to being the leader. Shall we depose Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? We have a rule that we may raise an object to a higher grade of sanctity, but must not degrade it to a lower. If we let one master preach on one Sabbath and one on the next, this will cause jealousy. So we can't make them exactly equal, because they'll be rivals then, and no one will know who the authority is, and we'll be back to where we were before. Let therefore Rabban Gamliel preach 3 Sabbaths, so he will be clearly in charge. So he'll be in charge 3 out of 4, and Elazar ben Azariah 1 Sabbath. Okay, so Rabbi Elazar and Azariah, who's only 18 after all, will be able to keep some of his dignity and authority at least once a week. And also it takes Gamliel down a notch. Yeah. Also, I'd say in some ways it allows for the next transition to go easier, because Elazar ben Azariah now is clearly going to be vice president, right? And it is in reference to that a master said, whose Sabbath was it? So that was a phrase they had in those days. It was the Sabbath of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, because he's the one that spoke at the great synagogue. And that disciple, so the disciple, they want to know, who was the guy that created all the trouble in the first place? That all this ferment that created the story? It turns out it was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who actually is a radical. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai wrote the Zohar, the book of Jewish mysticism. Okay, just a few quick points to summarize and how this relates to Pesach. So, and this is just you're welcome to take this and to think about it yourself. We are also going to do this on Shabbat, and also more ideas about this on Shabbat. But so one of the biggest challenges seems to me, the Pesach story is, what do you do after the initial burst of freedom? So, I mean, it's a holiday that celebrates freedom. So the people cross the Red Sea, and boom, they're free. A lot of societies struggle with this. You have a revolution. What do you do now? And for a lot of societies, they fall into violence and anarchy. So they don't know what to do with the freedom. And then this is, the French Revolution, where it was like this violent, just we're going to kill everybody. The Iranian Revolution, which never recovered from it. I mean, it's like permanent revolution, and it's unstable. And in some ways, it's madness. There's lunacy. So it's always a problem. You're free. Congratulations, you're free. So think in the Torah for a second. What happens immediately after the Exodus? You've got the next really full story narrative is the Ten Commandments. Right. So you have law, so institutions. Then you have the building of the tabernacle in the desert. Right. Then you have Leviticus, which has rituals, all these rituals. So the burst of freedom in Exodus is followed immediately by stabilizing institutions. Law, physical structures, rituals. And I think a very powerful message there. That Exodus 2.0, the next phase has to be thought through also. It can't just be this burst of freedom. So now you've got, 1,000 years later, the rabbis also trying to figure this out. So they've worked out these structures. But even within the structures themselves, you have to figure out, okay, so how do we have transitions of power? How do we exercise power? How do we allow for free debate? How do we control the debate? This whole story, which is just hinted at in the Seder, is really about this Exodus 2.0, maybe 3.0, which is how do you establish efficient political structures that allow for the exercise of power in a free country? Okay.